The bullet had torn through Colt Ingram's chest, just as the sun began its descent behind the Tobacco Root Mountains. And now he floated somewhere between this world and the next, unable to tell which direction led to salvation. Blood pooled beneath him in the dry Montana dirt, mixing with dust to form a dark paste that would likely mark his final resting place. Another nameless cowboy who had drawn too slow in a territory where speed meant everything. The darkness pulled at him with insistent fingers, dragging him down into depths where pain no longer existed, where the burning agony in his chest would finally cease its relentless assault on his consciousness. He wanted to surrender to it, wanted to let go of the threads binding him to a life that had brought him nothing but hardship and loss. But then he heard it. A voice, clear as mountain water and sweet as honey, drifted through the haze of his dying mind. It sang words he could not quite grasp, a melody that seemed older than the mountains themselves, and something deep within his chest responded to it. Not his ruined heart, struggling to pump blood through torn vessels, but something more fundamental, more essential to his existence than mere flesh and bone. The voice wrapped around him like a warm blanket on a cold winter night, and suddenly the darkness did not seem so inviting, so inevitable. He fought against the pull, fought against the comfortable numbness that had been settling over him like fresh snow, and reached toward that voice with everything he had left. His eyes cracked open to see a woman kneeling beside him, her face haloed by the dying sunlight that turned her auburn hair to living flame. She sang still, her hands pressed against his chest where the blood flowed freely, her eyes closed as if in prayer. He had never seen her before, would have remembered a face like that, all sharp angles and soft curves that somehow complemented each other perfectly. Her voice never wavered even as tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dust that coated her skin. She wore a simple calico dress, faded from too many washings, and her hands were rough with calluses that spoke of hard work and harder times. Colt tried to speak, to ask who she was, and why she bothered with a dying man, but no sound emerged from his throat beyond a wet gurgle that brought fresh pain shooting through his chest. The woman's eyes snapped open at the sound, and he found himself staring into irises the color of storm clouds over the prairie, gray and turbulent and impossibly deep. Recognition flashed across her features, not of him specifically, but of his consciousness, his return to the land of the living. "Do not try to talk," she said, her speaking voice as musical as her singing had been, though now it carried an edge of command that brooked no argument. "You have been shot through the lung, and every breath you take brings you closer to drowning in your own blood. I am going to move you, and it will hurt worse than anything you have ever felt, but if you wish to live, you must endure it." He managed the barest nod, and she slipped her arms beneath him with surprising strength for someone of her build. The world exploded into white agony as she lifted him, and he felt consciousness slipping away again, felt the darkness reaching for him with renewed hunger. But that voice came again, singing that same wordless melody, and he clung to it like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. She carried him across ground that seemed to stretch forever, each step jarring fresh torment through his ravaged body, and still she sang. When next he fully surfaced from the sea of pain, he found himself lying on a narrow bed in a small cabin that smelled of herbs and wood smoke. The woman worked over him with quick efficiency, her hands slick with his blood as she probed the wound in his chest. A kerosene lamp cast flickering shadows on rough-hewn walls, adorned with bundles of dried plants he could not identify. Through a single window he could see full darkness had fallen, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds spilled on black velvet. "The bullet passed clean through," the woman said, noticing his open eyes. That is both fortunate and unfortunate. Fortunate because I do not have to dig for it. Unfortunate because I must pack both the entry and exit wounds to prevent you from bleeding to death before your body can begin to heal itself. Who? He managed to croak, the single word costing him more effort than running a mile would have when he was whole and healthy. My name is Beatrice Porter, she replied, pressing a cloth soaked in something that burned like liquid fire against the hole in his chest. And you are in my cabin, 3 miles east of Hecla. I was gathering evening primrose by Moose Creek when I heard the gunshot and found you lying in the dirt like discarded refuse. Now be quiet and let me work, or my efforts to save you will be for nothing. He obeyed, partly because she commanded it and partly because he lacked the strength to do otherwise. She worked through the night. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find her spooning broth between his lips, other times surfacing to the sound of that achingly beautiful voice singing songs that seemed to hold back the darkness pressing in at the edges of his vision. Once he woke screaming as fever took hold, and she was there immediately, bathing his burning skin with cool water and murmuring words of comfort that penetrated the delirium gripping his mind. Days blurred together in a haze of pain and healing. Beatrice tended him with tireless dedication, changing his bandages twice daily, forcing him to take sips of bitter tea that she claimed would prevent infection from setting into his wounds. She was not gentle in her ministrations, but neither was she cruel, simply practical in the way of frontier women who had learned that sentiment was a luxury they could not afford. She told him little about herself beyond her name, deflecting his questions with practiced ease, and he found himself increasingly curious about this woman who had pulled him back from death's door with nothing more than her voice and her determination. On the 4th day, he managed to stay conscious for more than a few minutes at a time, and she allowed him to take a few spoonfuls of stew thick with venison and wild onions. The act of swallowing exhausted him, but he finished what she offered, knowing he needed to regain his strength if he hoped to survive. She watched him eat with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul, and he found himself unable to meet her gaze for long. "Why did you save me?" he asked when he had finished, his voice still rough but stronger than it had been. "You do not know me, have no reason to risk yourself for a stranger who might be a criminal or worse." Beatrice was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "Because I could not do otherwise," she finally said. "Because I have seen too much death in my life and I grow weary of it. Because your eyes, even dimmed with approaching death, held something worth preserving. Take your pick of reasons, they are all true enough." "The singing," he pressed. "When I was dying, I heard you singing. It pulled me back." A faint smile touched her lips, the first he had seen from her, and it transformed her face from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "My mother taught me those songs when I was a girl. She said they held power, that they could heal the sick and comfort the dying. I thought them merely pretty melodies until I found myself singing over your body, willing you to live." Perhaps there was more truth to her words than I credited. Over the following week, as strength slowly returned to Colt's body, he learned more about his mysterious savior. Beatrice had come to Montana 3 years prior with her husband, a prospector who had convinced her that fortune awaited them in the gold fields. They had staked a claim near Hecla and worked it for 2 years, finding just enough color to keep hope alive, but never the mother lode that would change their circumstances. Then, a rockslide had taken her husband's life, crushing him while Beatrice watched helplessly from 50 yards away. She had stayed on, unwilling or unable to return to her family in Ohio, and made her living selling herbs and remedies to the miners and cowboys who passed through the territory. "I am not a doctor," she told him one evening as she changed his bandages, her fingers probing the healing flesh around his wounds with professional detachment. "But I have learned much about the body and what it needs to mend itself. The miners call me a witch sometimes, crossing themselves when I pass, but they still come knocking when fever takes their children or a wound turns septic. Fear and need make strange companions." The bullet hole in Colt's chest was healing cleanly, the flesh knitting itself back together with the resilience of youth and good constitution. He was 26 years old, though the hardness of frontier life had added years to his face that did not show in his birth date. Beatrice, he learned, was 24, though she carried herself with the confidence of someone much older. They were, in many ways, products of the same harsh environment, shaped by loss and struggle into something harder than they might have been in gentler circumstances. As his strength returned, Colt began to help around the cabin as much as his healing body would allow. He chopped wood for her stove, working slowly and carefully to avoid tearing open the still tender scar tissue across his chest. He hauled water from the creek that ran behind her property, mended a broken leg on her table, and fixed the latch on her door that had been hanging loose for months. She protested these efforts at first, telling him he needed rest above all else, but eventually she accepted his help with good grace. They fell into an easy rhythm, two solitary souls sharing space without crowding each other. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, the daughter of a seamstress and a Methodist minister who had died when she was 12. He spoke of his own upbringing on a hardscrabble ranch in southern Wyoming, the son of a cowboy and a Shoshone woman who had loved each other, despite the prejudices of their respective communities. Both had lost their parents young. Both had been set adrift in a world that offered few safe harbors for the displaced and dispossessed. "What brought you to Montana?" Beatrice asked one night, her fingers working at a piece of embroidery by the firelight. "And what led you to be lying in the dirt with a bullet in your chest?" Colt was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames dancing in the fireplace. "I was driving cattle up from Wyoming to the railhead in Helena," he finally said. "Good honest work for good honest pay. We stopped in Hecla to resupply and rest the herd, and I made the mistake of sitting in on a card game at the Silver Dollar Saloon. I am not much of a gambler, but I was up a few dollars when a man accused me of cheating. I was not, I swear it on my mother's grave, but he would not hear reason. We stepped outside to settle it, and he drew first. I got my gun out, but not fast enough. Did you kill him?" The question was asked matter-of-factly, without judgment, and Colt appreciated her for it. "I do not know," he admitted. "I got a shot off before his bullet took me down, but I cannot say if it found its mark. After I hit the ground, everything became confused. I remember hearing shouting, the sound of horses, and then nothing until I heard your voice. And if he survived, if he comes looking for you, then I will deal with it when the time comes. But I will not bring trouble to your door, Beatrice. As soon as I am strong enough to ride, I will move on and let you return to your life in peace." She looked up from her embroidery, her gray eyes catching the firelight and throwing it back in glinting sparks. "Perhaps I do not wish for you to move on quite so quickly. Perhaps I have grown accustomed to having another soul around, someone to talk with when the nights grow long and lonesome." Would that be so terrible? His heart, still healing in his chest, gave a strange lurch at her words. He had been careful not to let himself think about what he felt when he looked at her, had tried to keep his gratitude for her care separate from the more complicated emotions that stirred whenever she smiled or sang. But she had opened a door with her question, and he found himself stepping through it before his better judgment could intervene. "It would not be terrible at all," he said quietly. "Truth be told, I have been dreading the day when I would have to leave. These weeks in your care have been the most peaceful I can remember, despite the bullet hole and the fever and the pain. You have given me more than my life back, Beatrice. You have given me a reason to be grateful for it." Color rose in her cheeks, visible even in the dim firelight, and she looked down at her embroidery with sudden, intense focus. "That is a dangerous thing to say to a lonely widow, Colt Ingram. You may find yourself trapped here by more than a healing wound. I can think of worse fates than being trapped in the company of a beautiful woman who sings like an angel and tends wounds like a saint." "I am neither angel nor saint," she said, but her voice carried a warmth it had not held before. "I am simply a woman who has learned to survive in a hard land. But I appreciate the sentiment, even if it is born more from gratitude than genuine affection." He rose from his chair, moving carefully to avoid stressing his still healing chest, and crossed to where she sat. Kneeling beside her chair, he took the embroidery from her hands and set it aside, then captured both her hands in his. They were rough hands, marked by hard work and harder times, but he found them more beautiful than the softest ladies in any grand house. "It is not mere gratitude," he said, holding her gaze with his own. "Or if it is, then gratitude is a far more powerful emotion than I ever credited. You called me back from darkness with your voice, Beatrice. You tended my wounds when you could have left me to die, when any sensible person would have left me to die. You have opened your home and your life to me, and in return I have found myself thinking thoughts I have no right to think about a woman I have known for barely 3 weeks. What thoughts?" The question was barely a whisper, and her hands trembled slightly in his grip. "Thoughts of staying. Thoughts of building something here with you if you would have me. Thoughts of waking each morning to see your face and sleeping each night to the sound of your breathing. Thoughts of a future I never imagined wanting before I opened my eyes to see you kneeling over me, singing me back to life." Beatrice closed her eyes, and for a terrible moment he thought he had overstepped, had presumed too much from her kindness. But when she opened them again, they shone with unshed tears that caught the firelight like stars. "I loved my husband," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "But ours was a practical love, built on shared goals and mutual respect rather than passion. He was a good man, and I mourned him truly when he died. But I cannot say my heart broke at his passing, because I am not certain I ever gave him my whole heart to break. Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you human," Colt said gently. "We cannot control where our hearts lead us, only whether we choose to follow." "I am afraid," she confessed. "Afraid of feeling too much, of losing again what I have found. This territory takes everything eventually, Colt. It takes gold and dreams and lives with equal indifference." "What makes you think we could be any different?" "Because we have already survived the worst it can throw at us," he said. "You survived losing your husband, survived alone in a place that devours the weak without mercy. I survived a bullet through the chest that should have killed me. And I survived it because your voice gave me something to fight for. If we can survive all that, maybe we can survive anything." She pulled one hand free from his grip and raised it to his face, tracing the line of his jaw with fingers that trembled slightly. "You speak pretty words, Cowboy, but words are cheap in this territory. Can you back them with action when the time comes?" In answer, he leaned forward and kissed her, gently at first and then with increasing urgency as she responded in kind. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted of the peppermint tea she favored in the evenings. The kiss deepened, and he felt her arms come around his neck, pulling him closer despite the awkward angle of their positions. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and he could feel his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with his injury. "Is that action enough to satisfy you?" he asked, and she laughed, the sound bright and clear as a bell. "It is a start," she said, "but you have much more to prove before I am fully convinced of your sincerity." He proved his sincerity over the following weeks, as summer deepened into early fall, and the aspens in the high country began their transformation to gold. As his strength returned fully, he took on more responsibilities around the property, cutting firewood to see her through the coming winter, repairing the roof where shingles had blown loose in spring storms, and hunting to keep her larder stocked with meat. He rode into Hecla once, ostensibly to purchase supplies but also to learn what had become of the man who shot him. The news was both good and troubling. His own bullet had caught the man, a drifter named Jack Morrison, in the shoulder, wounding but not killing him. Morrison had left town the day after the shooting, and rumor had it he had moved on to the goldfields in Idaho Territory. The bartender at the Silver Dollar, a grizzled man named Pete who had witnessed the whole affair, confirmed that Morrison had drawn first and that Colt had acted in self-defense. There would be no legal consequences for the shooting, but Pete warned him that Morrison had friends who might not see it the same way. "Best watch your back," Pete advised, sliding a whiskey across the bar that Colt declined with a shake of his head. Morrison rode with some hard men before he drifted into Hecla. They might take exception to one of their own getting shot, even if he had it coming. Colt thanked him for the warning and purchased the supplies Beatrice needed, along with a few luxuries he thought might please her. A bolt of calico cloth in a deep blue that matched the Montana sky, a tin of store-bought cookies, and a book of poetry by someone named Whitman that the general store owner assured him was quite popular back east. He loaded everything onto the pack horse he had borrowed from Beatrice and headed back to the cabin, his mind working through the implications of what he had learned. He told Beatrice about Morrison and the potential for trouble, not wanting to keep secrets from her. She listened quietly, her hands busy with the bread dough she was kneading, and when he finished she simply nodded. "Trouble finds everyone in this territory eventually," she said. "The question is not whether it will come, but whether we will face it together or separately." "Together," he said without hesitation. "If you will have me, I would like to stay here to make this place my home. I have money saved from the cattle drive, enough to buy supplies and see us through the winter. In spring, I can hire on with another outfit, or perhaps we could expand your herb business. I am willing to work at whatever will keep us fed and safe." She dusted flour from her hands and turned to face him fully, her gray eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt or deception. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Then stay," she said simply. "Stay and help me build something that will outlast both of us. Stay and give me a reason to sing again, not from grief or duty, but from joy." That night they made love for the first time, their bodies coming together with a tenderness born of mutual respect and growing affection. Colt was careful of his still healing chest, and Beatrice was patient with his caution, guiding him with gentle hands and whispered encouragements. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her narrow bed, her head resting on his shoulder and his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare arm. "I never thought I would feel this way again," she murmured into the darkness. "I had convinced myself that part of my life was over, that I would live out my days alone and be content with it. Then you appeared, dying in the dirt, and everything changed." "My mother used to say that the spirits guide us to where we need to be," Colt said. "She believed that everything happens for a reason, even the painful things. I never put much stock in it, thought it was just pretty talk to make sense of senseless tragedy. But lying here with you, I find myself wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe I needed to nearly die to find the life I was meant to live. Beatrice propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with an expression he could not quite read in the darkness. The spirits or simple chance, it matters little. What matters is that you are here, that we are here together, and that we choose to make something of it. Tomorrow will bring what it brings, but tonight we have this. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and when morning came, Colt woke to the sound of Beatrice singing as she prepared breakfast. The song was different from the one that had called him back from death, lighter and more joyful, and he lay in bed listening to it with a smile on his face. This was what happiness felt like, he realized. Not the wild euphoria of a successful cattle drive or the satisfaction of a job well done, but this quiet contentment, this sense of being exactly where he belonged. The fall passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. They harvested the last of the herbs from Beatrice's garden, bundling and drying them for sale in town. Colt built a proper smokehouse for preserving meat and reinforced the cabin's foundation against the winter snows that would soon come. They made the trip into Hecla together once a week, selling Beatrice's remedies and purchasing supplies, and gradually the town grew accustomed to seeing them as a pair. Some looked at them with approval, glad to see the widow Porter finding happiness again, while others muttered about the impropriety of a woman taking up with a man so soon after her husband's death. Beatrice ignored the gossips with the easy disdain of someone who had long since stopped caring what others thought of her choices. In late October, the first snow fell, dusting the mountains white and signaling the beginning of Montana's long winter. Colt and Beatrice spent the evening watching it fall through the cabin window, wrapped together in a quilt Beatrice had sewn from scraps of fabric. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, and the lamp cast a warm glow over the small space that had become his home in every way that mattered. "Marry me," Colt said suddenly, the words emerging without conscious thought. "I know it has not been long, and I know people will talk, but I do not care. I want to make this official, want to stand before whoever will witness it and declare my intentions to the world. Marry me, Beatrice." She was quiet for so long that he began to fear he had miscalculated, had pushed too hard and too fast. But then she turned in his arms and kissed him with a fierceness that stole his breath. "Yes," she said when they broke apart. "Yes, I will marry you, Colt Ingram. I will marry you and build a life with you and face whatever comes with you at my side. But I have one condition. Name it. We wait until spring. Not because I doubt my feelings or yours, but because I want to enter this marriage with clear eyes and full knowledge of what we are undertaking. Winter in Montana is hard, and it will test us in ways that fair weather never could. If we still feel the same when the snow melts and the first flowers bloom, then we will marry with the certainty that what we have is strong enough to last." It was a sensible request, born from hard-won experience and practical wisdom, and Colt found himself respecting her all the more for making it. "Until spring, then," he agreed. "But know that my mind will not change, no matter how hard the winter proves." "Nor will mine," she said. "But it will do us both good to be certain." The winter that followed was indeed hard, with snowdrifts that sometimes reached the cabin's eaves and temperatures that plunged far below zero. They were trapped inside for days at a time, dependent on the supplies they had laid in and each other for company. It could have been a miserable experience, could have revealed fatal incompatibilities in their personalities or expectations. Instead, it deepened the bond between them, revealing strengths and vulnerabilities that fair weather concealed. Colt learned that Beatrice suffered from terrible nightmares, waking sometimes in the dead of night screaming her dead husband's name and reliving the moment of his death. He held her through these episodes, offering wordless comfort until the shaking stopped and she could breathe normally again. She, in turn, discovered that his wound pained him more than he admitted, especially in cold weather, and she brewed special teas and prepared poultices that eased the aching scar tissue. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. He told her about his mother's people, the Shoshone traditions she had tried to pass on to him despite his father's disapproval, and the sense of belonging to two worlds but being fully accepted by neither. She spoke of her childhood poverty, the shame of wearing dresses sewn from flour sacks while other girls wore store-bought finery, and her determination to rise above the circumstances of her birth. They were, in many ways, two people who had spent their lives on the margins, and in each other they found acceptance without judgment. Christmas came and went, marked by a simple exchange of gifts. He had carved her a set of wooden spoons from birch wood, each one polished to a satin finish. She had sewn him a new shirt from the blue calico he had bought her, insisting that he needed it more than she needed a dress. They ate roast venison and dried apple pie and counted themselves richer than any mining baron with his mansion in Helena. In January, a stranger appeared at their door during a break in the weather. He was a young man, barely 20, with frost in his eyebrows and desperation in his face. His horse had thrown a shoe, he explained, and he needed shelter while he made repairs. Beatrice welcomed him in without hesitation, setting food before him and directing Colt to help with the horse. Over dinner, the young man introduced himself as Thomas Wright, a prospector heading to a new claim near Bannack. They talked long into the evening, and Thomas mentioned hearing about a group of men who had been asking questions in Hecla about a cowboy who had shot Jack Morrison. The description matched Colt, and Thomas thought they should know that these men seemed intent on finding him. They were not lawmen, Thomas emphasized, but rather friends of Morrison who felt his honor needed avenging. After Thomas left the next morning, Colt and Beatrice discussed what to do. She wanted him to go to the sheriff in Hecla to explain the situation and seek protection under the law. He was reluctant, knowing that frontier justice often had little to do with legal niceties, and that involving the law could sometimes make matters worse rather than better. They argued about it, their first real disagreement, and it ended with both of them angry and frustrated. They did not speak for hours, moving around the cabin in tense silence, until finally Colt could stand it no longer. He crossed to where she stood at the wash basin, scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary, and turned her to face him. "I am sorry," he said. "You are right, and I am a fool. I will go to the sheriff and lay everything out for him. I do not want to leave you, do not want to face whatever is coming, but I will not put you at risk because of my pride." Tears streamed down her face, and she threw her arms around his neck, holding him with desperate strength. "I am sorry, too," she whispered. "I should not have pushed so hard. I am just so afraid of losing you, of having you torn away just when I have found you. This territory has taken so much from me already, and I do not think I could bear to lose you too." "You will not lose me," he promised, knowing even as he said it that it was a promise beyond his power to keep. "I will do whatever it takes to stay with you, to build the life we have planned. But we must be smart about it, must not let fear or pride drive our decisions." They held each other for a long time, drawing strength from their physical connection, and when they finally broke apart, the tension between them had dissipated. They would face whatever came together, and that knowledge was enough to push back the fear that threatened to overwhelm them both. February brought a false spring, with temperatures rising into the 40s and the snow beginning to melt. Colt took advantage of the break in the weather to ride into Hecla and speak with the sheriff, a man named Tom Blackburn who had a reputation for fairness and integrity. Blackburn listened to Colt's story without interruption, occasionally making notes in a ledger he kept on his desk. "I remember hearing about that shooting," Blackburn said when Colt finished. "Pete at the Silver Dollar gave me a full accounting, said it was clear self-defense. Far as the law is concerned, you are in the clear. But if Morrison's friends are looking for trouble, that is a different matter entirely. The law can only protect you so much out here, especially if they decide to bushwhack you on the trail rather than face you straight on. What do you suggest? Stay alert, watch your back, and do not travel alone if you can help it. I will put the word out that you are under my protection, such as it is, and that might discourage them. But ultimately, you may have to face them and settle this once and for all. Just make sure when you do it where there are witnesses who can testify that you acted in self-defense." It was not the reassurance Colt had hoped for, but it was more than he had expected. He thanked the sheriff and headed back to the cabin, his mind working through various scenarios and preparations. If Morrison's friends came looking for him, he needed to be ready, needed to ensure that Beatrice would not be caught in the crossfire. When he arrived home, he found Beatrice in the garden, examining the early shoots of spring bulbs pushing through the melting snow. She looked up at his approach, and her smile faded as she read the concern in his face. "What did the sheriff say?" she asked, brushing dirt from her hands. He told her everything, including Blackburn's warning about potential bushwhacking. She listened quietly, her expression growing more troubled with each word, but she did not interrupt or offer false comfort. When he finished, she simply nodded. "Then we prepare," she said. "We make sure the cabin is secure, that we have weapons and ammunition readily available, and that we have a plan for what to do if they come. I will not cower in fear, Colt, but neither will I be foolish enough to pretend there is no danger." They spent the next week preparing for trouble that might never come. Colt reinforced the cabin door with iron bars and installed shutters on the windows that could be barred from inside. He cleaned and oiled his revolver and rifle, and was pleased to discover that Beatrice was an excellent shot with both weapons. She had learned to shoot out of necessity after her husband died, she explained, and had practiced regularly to maintain her proficiency. They established signals and rally points, plans for what to do if they were separated or if the cabin came under attack. It felt excessive, preparing for war when they wanted only peace, but the very act of preparation gave them both a sense of control over their circumstances. They were not helpless victims waiting for fate to overtake them, but rather active participants in their own defense. March came in like a lion, with howling winds and fresh snow that buried the early signs of spring beneath a white blanket. But by mid-month, the weather turned again, and this time the warming seemed likely to last. The creek behind the cabin swelled with meltwater, and the first birds began to return from their southern migrations. Beatrice's bulbs bloomed in riots of color, crocuses and snowdrops that pushed through the last patches of snow with stubborn determination. On the first truly warm day, with the temperature climbing into the 50s and the sun shining from a cloudless sky, Colt took Beatrice's hand and led her outside. They walked to a meadow about a quarter-mile from the cabin, where wildflowers were just beginning to emerge and the grass showed the first hints of green. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his, and smiled at the question in her eyes. "It is spring," he said simply. "The snow has melted, the flowers are blooming, and my feelings for you are stronger than ever. Will you marry me now, Beatrice Porter? Will you let me make you my wife before God and whatever witnesses we can gather?" Her answer was a kiss that tasted of joy and promise and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling so broadly their faces ached with it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you today, tomorrow, whenever you wish. I love you, Colt Ingram, and I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you." They rode into Hecla the next day and found a circuit preacher who agreed to perform the ceremony. It was a simple affair, conducted in the preacher's small church with Sheriff Blackburn and his wife serving as witnesses. Beatrice wore her best dress, the blue calico Colt had bought her, which she had finally sewn into a simple but elegant gown. Colt wore his new shirt and his cleanest trousers, his dark hair slicked back and his face freshly shaven. They exchanged vows in voices that shook with emotion, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, they kissed to the applause of their small audience. Afterward, the sheriff and his wife, Margaret, insisted on hosting a small celebration at their home. Several other townsfolk joined them, people who had come to respect Beatrice during her years in the territory and who were genuinely happy to see her finding joy again. There was food and music and dancing, and for a few hours, Colt and Beatrice forgot about Morrison's friends and potential danger and simply allowed themselves to be happy. They returned to the cabin as the sun set, painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the snow-capped peaks of the Tobacco Root Mountains. Everything felt perfect, felt exactly as it should be, and Colt dared to hope that maybe their troubles were behind them, that Morrison's friends had moved on to other concerns and would leave them in peace. He should have known better than to tempt fate. 3 days after the wedding, Colt was in the barn tending the horses when he heard Beatrice scream. He ran for the cabin, drawing his revolver as he moved, and burst through the door to find 3 men inside. 2 held rifles pointed at Beatrice, who stood frozen by the stove, her face pale but her eyes blazing with fury rather than fear. The 3rd man, older and harder looking than the others, stood in the center of the room with his gun holstered but his hand resting on the grip in clear threat. "Colt Ingram," the older man said, his voice flat and cold as a frozen pond. "We have been looking for you. My name is Frank Morrison, and the man you shot was my brother. I am here to collect the debt you owe for his blood." Colt kept his gun pointed at the floor, not wanting to escalate the situation but ready to act if necessary. "Your brother drew on me first," he said, keeping his voice calm and level. "It was self-defense, and there are witnesses who will testify to it. I have no quarrel with you, Frank, and I do not want trouble. Let us both walk away from this." "My brother is crippled," Frank said, his hand tightening on his gun. "That bullet you put in his shoulder tore up the nerves so bad he cannot use his arm anymore. He will never deal cards again, never work a claim, never provide for himself. You might as well have killed him for all the life you left him. So yes, we have a quarrel and we are going to settle it right now." "Not with her here," Colt said quickly. "Whatever needs settling is between you and me. Let her leave and we will finish this however you want." Frank laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you can shoot me in the back the moment she is clear. I am not that stupid, Cowboy. She stays right where she is and you are going to drop that gun real slow. Then you and I are going to step outside and we are going to have ourselves a fair fight. You win, my boys and I ride out and you never see us again. I win. Well, you will not be seeing anything ever again." Beatrice found her voice then, and it rang with authority. "There will be no gunfight on my property," she declared. "I will not have more blood spilled on this land. If you have a legal grievance, take it to the sheriff. Otherwise, get out." One of the men with rifles laughed. "She has spirit, Frank. Maybe after we are done with him, We should see about teaching her some manners." The words were barely out of his mouth before Colt's gun came up and fired, the bullet taking the man in the shoulder and spinning him around. The second rifleman started to bring his weapon to bear, but Beatrice grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove and swung it with all her strength, catching him across the side of the head with a sound like a melon splitting. He went down hard and did not move. Frank's gun cleared leather with impressive speed, but Colt was already moving, diving to the side as Frank's shot tore through the air where he had been standing. Colt fired twice from the floor, both shots catching Frank in the chest and driving him backward into the door. The outlaw looked down at the spreading red stains on his shirt with an expression of surprise, then slowly slid down to sit on the floor, his gun falling from nerveless fingers. The cabin fell silent except for the groaning of the wounded man and the ragged breathing of the man Beatrice had struck. Colt rose slowly, his gun still ready, and crossed to where Frank sat dying. The outlaw's eyes found him, and something like respect showed in their fading depths. "Good shooting," Frank whispered, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. "Reckon Jack had it coming after all if he was fool enough to draw on a man that fast. You take care now, Cowboy. Take care of that woman who fights like a wildcat." Then the light went out of his eyes and he was gone. Colt turned to find Beatrice standing over the man she had hit, the skillet still gripped in her white-knuckled hands. He gently took it from her and set it aside, then pulled her into his arms. She shook like a leaf in a high wind, but she did not cry, did not fall apart as she might have been expected to do. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "It is over," he confirmed, though he knew he would have to ride to Hecla and fetch the sheriff to deal with the bodies and the survivors. "You did well, Beatrice. You may have saved both our lives with that swing." She pulled back to look up at him, and he saw steel in those storm-gray eyes that had not been there before. "I told you I would not cower," she said. "I meant it. This is our home, and I will defend it with everything I have. No one threatens what we have built." The aftermath of the fight was messy but ultimately vindicated them. The wounded man Colt had shot, once his shoulder was tended to, confirmed that Frank had been obsessed with avenging his brother and had dragged them along on his quest for revenge. The man Beatrice had struck woke with a concussion, but no permanent damage, and was even more eager to testify that Colt had acted in self-defense. Sheriff Blackburn ruled the shooting justified and let both surviving outlaws go with a warning to leave the territory and never return. The incident became something of a local legend, the story of the cowboy who had cheated death twice and the woman who had saved him both times. People in Hecla treated Colt and Beatrice with new respect, a recognition that they were not to be trifled with, that they had proven themselves capable of surviving the worst the territory could throw at them. Life settled into a new normal after that, one marked by both caution and growing confidence. Colt hired on with a local rancher for the summer, earning good wages that he saved toward buying their own land. Beatrice expanded her herb business, teaching herself to make more complex remedies and tinctures that commanded higher prices. Together, they were building something solid, something that would last beyond the boom and bust cycles that plagued the mining camps. In July, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy tinged with appropriate concern for the realities of childbirth on the frontier. But Beatrice was strong and healthy, and she continued working through the summer and fall, only slowing down when her growing belly made certain tasks impractical. Colt fussed over her constantly, drawing teasing complaints that he treated her like spun glass rather than the capable woman she was. Their son was born in February of the following year, during a blizzard that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. Colt delivered the baby himself, with Beatrice coaching him through the process. And when he finally held the squalling infant in his arms, he wept openly at the miracle of it. They named him Samuel, after Colt's father, and Thomas, after the young prospector who had warned them about Morrison's friends. Samuel proved to be a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed fascinated by everything around him. Colt spent hours simply watching him sleep, marveling that he had helped create this perfect little person. Beatrice, for her part, took to motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else, though Colt sometimes caught her staring at their son with an expression of such fierce love it took his breath away. As Samuel grew, so did their family's fortunes. Colt's careful saving allowed them to purchase 80 acres of good grazing land adjacent to Beatrice's original claim. They built a proper house to replace the cabin, nothing fancy but solid and spacious enough to accommodate their growing family. A daughter, Catherine, arrived 2 years after Samuel, followed 3 years later by another son they named William. The children grew up strong and happy, learning from both parents the skills needed to thrive in Montana territory. Colt never forgot the bullet that nearly killed him, the darkness that had pulled at him, or the voice that had called him back. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the work was done, he would ask Beatrice to sing the song she had sung over his dying body. She always obliged, her voice still as clear and sweet as it had been that day by Moose Creek, and he would listen with his eyes closed and his hand clasped in hers, grateful beyond words for the second chance he had been given. Hecla grew and changed around them. The mining boom peaked and then slowly declined as the easy gold played out. Some people moved on, chasing the next strike, while others stayed and adapted, finding new ways to make a living in the territory. Colt and Beatrice stayed, putting down roots that went deep into Montana soil, building a legacy that would outlast them both. In 1889, when Montana achieved statehood, Colt was 43 years old and Beatrice was 41. Samuel was 17, already showing signs of the man he would become, tall and serious like his father but with his mother's gift for healing. Catherine was 15, a spirited girl who could outride most of the boys in the territory and who had her father wrapped firmly around her little finger. William was 12, a dreamer who loved books and learning and talked about becoming a teacher someday. They gathered on the porch of their house the day Montana officially became a state, all 5 of them, and watched the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their struggles and triumphs. Colt had his arm around Beatrice's shoulders, and she leaned into him with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Stopping to help a dying cowboy instead of walking away and preserving your peaceful life?" Beatrice laughed, the sound carrying across the evening air like music. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me more than you know when you opened your eyes that day. You gave me purpose, adventure, love, and a family I never thought I would have. If I could go back and choose again, I would make the same choice every time. Even knowing all the trouble that came with it, especially knowing the trouble. The easy path is rarely the one worth traveling, Colt. You taught me that." Samuel called them inside for dinner, and they went together, surrounded by the laughter and warmth of the life they had built. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and they lay together in the darkness, Colt thought about the man he had been at 26, lying in the dirt with a bullet in his chest, giving up on life because he could not see any reason to fight for it. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. The bullet scar was still there on his chest, a permanent reminder of how close he had come to losing everything he now held dear. But it no longer pained him, even in cold weather, and he had come to think of it not as a mark of near death, but as a symbol of rebirth. He had died that day by Moose Creek, in a very real sense. The directionless drifter he had been had bled out into the Montana dirt. But Beatrice's voice had called forth someone new, someone capable of love and commitment and building a life worth living. She had not just saved his life, she had given him a reason to live it. Years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow as years always do. They buried friends and neighbors, celebrated weddings and births, and watched their children grow into adults who made them proud. Samuel married a rancher's daughter and took over the management of their cattle operation. Catherine shocked everyone by becoming a doctor, traveling back east for her education, and then returning to Montana to serve the communities that had raised her. William became not a teacher but a lawyer, using his love of learning and his gift for words to fight for justice in a territory that sometimes valued might overwrite. Colt and Beatrice became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their lives rich with family and connection. They grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They still worked the ranch, though increasingly they left the heavy labor to younger hands, and they still sat together on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains that had been witness to their love story. On a spring evening in 1912, when Colt was 66 and Beatrice was 64, they sat together as they had countless times before. The mountains were painted gold by the setting sun, and the air carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. Colt felt at peace, content with the life he had lived and the love he had found. "Sing for me," he asked, as he had so many times over the years. "Sing the song that brought me back." Beatrice's voice was not as strong as it once had been, touched by age and time, but it still carried power and beauty. She sang the old melody her mother had taught her, the one that held healing in its notes, and Colt listened with his eyes closed and a smile on his lips. When she finished, he opened his eyes and looked at her, seeing not the lined face and silver hair of an old woman but the fierce, beautiful spirit that had knelt beside a dying cowboy and refused to let him go. "I love you," he said simply. "Thank you for calling me back that day. Thank you for every day since." "I love you too," she replied, taking his hand in hers. "And I would call you back 1,000 times more if I had to. You are my heart, Colt Ingram, and I could no more let you go than I could stop my own heart from beating." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky. Around them, their ranch hummed with the quiet activity of a successful operation. In the distance, they could hear their grandson playing with his children, their laughter carrying on the evening air. This was their legacy, Colt thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the house, but the love and family they had built from nothing more than a chance meeting, and a song sung over a dying man. When they finally rose to go inside, Colt felt a twinge in his chest where the bullet scar marked his skin. But it was a good twinge, a reminder of where he had been and how far he had come. He had been close to death once, so close he could feel its cold embrace pulling him down into darkness. But a woman's voice had called him back, had given him a reason to fight, to live, to love. Everything good in his life had flowed from that moment, from that decision to open his eyes and see what waited for him on the other side of darkness. They lived many more years together, growing old with grace and dignity, their love deepening with each passing season. When Colt finally did pass, in the winter of 1920 at the age of 74, he died peacefully in his sleep with Beatrice beside him. She held his hand as his breathing slowed and stilled, and she sang to him one final time, the song that had brought him back so many years ago. This time she did not call him back, but rather sang him forward, guiding him gently into whatever came next. Beatrice lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her and honored the life she had built. She spent her final years telling stories of the old days, of Montana Territory and the hardships they had endured, and most especially of the cowboy who had come into her life bleeding and dying, and who had given her more happiness than she had ever thought possible. When she died in the spring of 1925, at the age of 77, they buried her beside Colt on a hill overlooking their ranch. The whole community turned out for her funeral, 3 generations of people whose lives she had touched with her healing skills and her kindness. At the graveside, Samuel stood with his siblings and their families and told the story of how his parents had met, of the bullet and the song and the love that had grown from near tragedy into something beautiful and lasting. "My father used to say that he died that day by Moose Creek," Samuel said, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. "He said the old Colt Ingram bled out in the dirt, and a new man was born when he opened his eyes to see my mother kneeling beside him. She called him back from darkness, and he spent the rest of his life being grateful for that gift. They built something together that will outlast both of them, something that lives on in all of us who carry their blood and their legacy. We are their song, continuing long after their voices have stilled." The crowd dispersed slowly after the service, but the family lingered, reluctant to leave. They told more stories, laughed at remembered jokes, and cried at shared memories. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Colt and Beatrice had watched together countless times, Catherine began to sing. It was the old song, the healing song, and one by one her siblings and their children joined in until the whole family sang together, their voices rising into the Montana evening like a prayer. The song carried on the wind, across the ranch and the valley, and up into the mountains that had sheltered and challenged and ultimately embraced the cowboy and the woman who had saved him. It was a song of healing and hope, of second chances and new beginnings, of love found in unexpected places and held fast against all odds. It was, in every way that mattered, the song of Colt and Beatrice, sung by the family they had created and the legacy they had left behind. And if sometimes, on quiet spring evenings when the wildflowers bloomed and the air smelled of fresh grass and mountain snow, people claimed to hear 2 voices singing together on the hill where Colt and Beatrice were buried, well, that was just Montana being Montana. The land remembered its own, especially those who had loved it and each other with such fierce devotion. The song continued, as songs do, carrying forward through time and generations, a reminder that even the closest brush with death could lead to the fullest expression of life, if only you were brave enough to answer when love called your name.